Hello, everyone. How's it going? Hope you all can hear me and everything is going to be working all right tonight. Just me tonight, in case you haven't noticed, Abby's absence already. I don't know if she mentioned last stream, she's going to be away for the next few weeks for some vacation time, family time. So it'll just be me for today and for next week. Maybe I'll see about if I can find a guest to speak to, interview, or something like that. But okay, Bella, I'm trying to think. Okay, yeah. Um, for today, I just figured I'd take the opportunity to try and do a stream by myself because I've had a lot of research I've been doing into this eugenics and Zionism and potential um, connections and interplay there. So today will be a little bit more of a historical uh, deep dive, if you will. Hopefully, it all comes together so I don't just sound like a nut job. But and then a lesser known topic of Catholic eugenics. I'm finding that there's a narrative out there that the Catholics were kind of been against eugenics because of their arguments against like abortions and sterilizations and stuff, and so then they can be trying to portray themselves as champions of the fight against eugenics, and I find it somewhat laughable and suspicious. So I did a little bit of looking into it, and I found some interesting information to share with you guys. So, hello, Jacqueline, and hello, Rondo. Good to see you guys. Um, so, because I've been having issues with my computer, it'll just be mostly reading today. So, I guess I will get to that. Kind of going to be touching a little bit on because it's a. Go on, Bella. Now, go lie down. Go on. Hello, Cobra. So, because the topic is eugenics, we're going to talk a little bit about science and germ theory, I guess, because one of the things about eugenicists and stuff is they like to have novel treatments and wonder drugs like vaccines and whatnot. So we will be getting into some of that. I find that interestingly, germ theory is kind of ironically, in a lot of ways, it's just like capitalism. So what I mean by that is how like the historical passage from feudalism to capitalism is generally positively seen as historically seen as a positive development, provided in the Marxist sense that capitalism progresses to socialism, because otherwise it seems like it's going to kind of destroy us all if it doesn't get kind of evolved out of. So in the same sense, I think this is a good way to think of germ theory as far as how to be a critic of it. It's not that there haven't been positive advancements from that kind of science, but there is a darker side to it that likes to get brushed under the rug. So let's try and get into that a little bit. So here we go. So disclaimer ahead of the episode for anyone new watching. I am not anti-Semitic, and some of this information might come across to some uninitiated people as anti-Semitic kind of ranting and raving, but that's not the purpose of this presentation. So, Louis Pasteur, The Jewish Connection, by Saul J. Sanger, July 29, 2020. I just thought this was an interesting thing that I found. It was noteworthy information. As far as a little bit before I get started here, some people may not be aware of the historic rivalry between Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp, and that's extremely important as far as like recurring patterns in science and stuff like this, where go on, Bella, go on, lie down. Where one scientist kind of does a lot of important work, maybe a lot of their work even gets plagiarized by their rival, but their rival is the one that gets remembered. This is something that's happened time and time again with countless examples. But what's really, I think, this particular situation with Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp has had serious ramifications as far as our health and our understanding of the nature of disease and stuff like this. So conventional opinion has been that Louis Pasteur, in a kind of oversimplification, like Louis Pasteur was right and Antoine Béchamp was wrong, and his terrain theory needs to be ignored and considered obsolete and unscientific, and Louis Pasteur's, all golden boy or whatever, we got to worship him, right? So, but then if you look at the kind of the economics at play, even back then, you kind of recognize that one of them was more like a business savvy kind of figure who had connections with people. I'm kind of suggesting that if someone does more in-depth historical work, they'll probably find that he kind of got some financing from people who turn out to be actual, like, part of the early Zionist movement. So for what it's worth, I just find that interesting, right? And so, because the thing is that Catholics have historically kind of been some of the worst anti-Semites, according to the traditional understanding of the term, disregarding the fact that Semites are not just Jewish people, but in common parlance, people understand what I mean when I'm, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so what's interesting is when you look into the background of Antoine Béchamp, you don't really find this Jewish connection, and with Louis Pasteur, you do. And so I just thought I'd kind of look into this and pull this thread and see where it kind of takes me. So Louis Pasteur, known as the father of microbiology, was a French microbiologist and chemist who confirmed the germ theory of disease, pursuant to which microorganisms do not develop absent contamination, and is renowned for his discoveries of the principles of vaccination and microbial fermentation. For those who did not know, to a chance reform of a disease to humans could cause immunity to its virulent version. The story begins with Rabbi Dr. Israel Michel Rabinowitz, sorry about the names, a Russo-French translator, essayist, and author of Hebrew, Polish, French, and Latin grammars. The descendant of a long line of rabbis, he pursued his rabbinical studies in Grodno and Brest, and after earning his semicha, studied Greek and Latin and entered the University of Breslau, where he studied philology and medicine. He went to Paris in 1854 to complete his medical studies, served there as a hospital intern, and earned his MD in 1865, but he never practiced medicine. Rabbi Rabinowitz earned lasting fame for being the first to translate parts of the Talmud into French, integrating critical commentaries into his translation, blah, blah, blah. So it all began when Rabbi Rabinowitz, then living in Paris, showed his translation of the Talmudic order Moed, which deals with Jewish festivals, to his good friend Louis Pasteur. The biologist became fascinated by the Talmudic discussion on page 83b of Tractate Yoma, where the rabbis accurately describe the 5 signs of a rabid dog: open mouth, dripping saliva, tail between paws, abnormal gait, and droopy ears. He became intrigued by the rabbis' ancient Hebrew wisdom, particularly their prescribed cure for a person infected by the bite of a rabid dog. If someone was bitten by a mad dog, affected with rabies, one should feed him the lobe of that dog's liver. Even though a dog is a non-kosher animal, the rabbis considered eating the dog's liver to be a legitimate cure to a serious illness and therefore permitted it to be eaten. Pasteur understood the Talmud to be teaching that the way to cure infectious ailments was to introduce small amounts of the infection into the organism, and he hypothesized that an infected body produces antibodies which could then attack an invading infection. To test his theory, he cultivated cholera bacteria in chicken broth, exposed a sample of chickens in a pen to the cholera, found that he could not thereafter infect them with fresh bacteria, and concluded that the weakened bacteria had rendered these chickens immune to the ravages of the disease. Pasteur next applied this immunization method, he coined the term vaccines for his artificially weakened bacteria, to prevent anthrax, a feared killer of cattle, which is often fatal to humans who come in contact with infected animals or contaminated animal products. He cultivated bacteria from the blood of animals infected with anthrax, injected a sample of the animals with the bacteria, and proved the bacteria caused the disease. When he was advised that the carcasses of sheep that had died of anthrax were buried in fields, Pasteur hypothesized that earthworms were bringing bacteria to the surface. He was proven correct when his experiments found anthrax bacteria in the earthworm's excrement. After he advised the farmers not to bury the dead animals, the spread of anthrax significantly stemmed. So, as you can see, positive developments. Sorry if I'm boring you. Just kind of droning on. I'm trying to kind of get to the point. I think, I'm not sure if, I think that was the last bit. There was other articles that are kind of mentioning, like carrying on the connection. So let me just share this next tab here. This is Louis Pasteur and Halasha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's just one thing that Pasteur is known for is pasteurization, right? So something that those of us who drink wine and beer, actually we appreciate this kind of advancement so that we can do more with ourselves without dying so soon. However, I found that this is just fascinating stuff for me. I had no idea that there was this kind of a Jewish influence on the thought process leading to the discovery like that. It's not like necessarily bad thing. It's just an interesting to show the cultural influence, like the religious influence on scientific development. People typically think of science as like a godless kind of phenomenon, right? So let me just kind of take a look at you guys in the chat so I'm not just ignoring you. Got you drinking cow's milk. Yeah, I still wonder about raw milk being good for you and stuff, and pasteurization. I feel like for milk, maybe kind of over exaggerated its benefits, and there's some nuance there, but need to do some science about that. So hello, Tim MC, good to see you. European rulers always claim God and behave like the devil. That's kind of what I'm getting at with this, right? Like, not to be taking a shit on the religious people of good nature, but some of these people who claim to be practitioners do some horrible things to their fellow human beings, and there's, I think, some of this colonial mentality that goes with it, as far as people want to celebrate the development of these wonder drugs, but do you realize how some of these advancements were advanced with whose blood, right? So Jacqueline says, didn't they do something similar to that in the 18th century with smallpox, or was it different in that they injected people with cowpox? Yeah, basically, Edward Jenner, everyone celebrates as being the inventor, the discoverer of how to cure smallpox, even though they didn't really get rid of it until the 60s and the 70s, which I'm going to get into. But in order to test, they do extreme, what would, by today's standards would be extremely unethical and unacceptable ways to demonstrate the efficacy of their vaccine. And there's a whole list of examples, right? Edward Jenner injected a little boy, his gardener's son or something, with his untested vaccine in order to figure out if it would work or not. Luckily, this kid was okay. But as we've seen over the years, this reckless kind of decision that the information gleaned from experimenting on people is necessary and worth it. That's definitely that eugenic thought process, and it's very much prevalent today. It's just gotten worse since that time, right? So religion has definitely been historically used as a cover for fuck shit. Oh yeah. So time to not be treating it with kid gloves, I guess, right? So when I was a kid, my mom always used to order some pasteurized milk and some sterilized milk. Sterilized milk tasted terrible. Yeah, that's exactly why this article is saying, like literally it says right here, why not use sterilization? It all boils down to taste, pun of course intended. Sterilization severely affects the taste and quality of most foods. So pasteurization is about killing the harmful bacteria, right? But then as we've found out with milk, it also just kind of kills some of the beneficial bacteria. But I think it's probably more useful in the wine and beer making process. So, however, I'm kind of digressing. Let me just get back to what I was saying here. So how does pasteurization affect the kashrus of wine? I don't know what that word means. There are 2 prohibitions on wine in the Jewish faith. The first prohibition involves biblically forbidden wine. The Torah forbids the use of wine that was poured as a libation in the religious worship of foreign deities. And the second prohibition involved rabbinically forbidden wine. The rabbis forbade the consumption of wine that was poured or touched by a Gentile, which I've come to find is a very derogatory and rude term talking about people like me. So, fuck that. The majority of poskim told that the reason for the prohibition was to prevent intermarriage. It is important to note that the rabbinic prohibition of stam yainam is indeed a serious one. Rabbi Adam Danziger writes, "One who drinks rabbinically forbidden wine uproots his soul from the place that it was rooted in holiness and loses his share in the world to come." This is also clearly indicated in the Zohar. The Cheetah writes that the punishment for violating the prohibition of stam yainam is so severe, the violator is reincarnated as a jackass. So, but we have an interesting exception. The Gemara quotes the opinion of Rava that the prohibition upon Gentile wine does not apply when the wine was previously cooked. So if you pasteurize the wine, the dirty germs from the unclean Gentiles has been purified. So you're allowed to put this whatever substance into the temple of your body. So you see there's some just eugenic undertones inherent with these religious belief systems, and you don't really know that when you're being taught them when you're young, and maybe even some of these older practitioners don't notice that or acknowledge that that's part of it. But when you research eugenics in a more in-depth way, it's a bigger topic than just what the Nazis did. But like when you look at it historically and stuff, I find these threads extremely clear. So moving on, this Princeton University Press, whatever little brief, whatever I found is important to point out as far as defenders of Pasteur. In the private science of Louis Pasteur, Gerald Geeson has written a controversial biography that finally penetrates the secrecy that has surrounded much of this legendary scientist's laboratory work. Geeson uses Pasteur's laboratory notebooks, made available only recently, and his publisher's papers to present a rich and full account of some of the most famous episodes in the history of science and their darker sides. For example, Pasteur's rush to develop the rabies vaccine and the human risks his haste entailed. The discrepancies between the public record and the private science of Louis Pasteur tells us as much about the man as they do about the highly competitive and political world he learned to master. Although experimental ingenuity served Pasteur well, he also owed much of his success to the polemical virtuosity and political savvy that won him unprecedented financial support from the French state during the late 19th century. But a close look at his greatest achievements raises ethical issues. In the case of Pasteur's widely publicized anthrax vaccine, Geeson reveals its initial defects and how Pasteur, in order to avoid embarrassment, secretly incorporated a rival colleague's findings to make his version of the vaccine work. Pasteur's premature decision to apply his rabies treatment to his first animal bite victims raises even deeper questions and must be understood not only in terms of the ethics of human experimentation and scientific method, but also in light of Pasteur's shift from a biological theory of immunity to a chemical theory, similar to ones he had often disparaged when advanced by his competitors. So this is often what I find happens in science and scientific discussions, right? When you end up disproving yourself, you falsify your own argument. Some of these people are so egotistical and irrational that rather than do the humble thing and the good thing for like historical, like for posterity, for everyone to understand what happened so that we don't distort like the retelling of the story, which is damaging to science. We need to have a clear record of what happened and who advanced the theory and who was holding advancement back. So yeah, not exactly sure where to land my plane on that one, right? So I guess I can just kind of move on. There's another long article here I wanted to share. Commenting too. Yeah, we'll have to talk about Henrietta Lacks one day, because I have to do a whole deep dive into that that story. I know a little bit about it, but I haven't really familiarized myself. But Rondo says, being disabled myself, I know that these doctors will utilize you for their practice if you allow them to. Yeah, they it's I don't even know how there's probably a lot of subconscious thought process going on here where they don't really, a lot of them, some of them probably do intentionally look at people as objects instead of people, right? As something to use for science. But a lot of them, I think, will use you with while still feeling like they care about you. They don't really feel like what they're doing is, they're trying to help you, and they understand they might have to hurt you in order to do so. But they still, if they have eugenic tendencies, they're more inclined to hurt you than help you. So, hey Mastermind, how's it going? And Grapentine, good to see you. So let me just take a bit of water here, and I'll show you what I'm going to get into here next. This is an interesting story about a forgotten Ukrainian Jew who developed the cholera and bubonic plague vaccines by the same author, 2022. So I just wanted to kind of read this story, kind of just because this guy's got an interesting life story and had a fairly significant effect on history, and nobody seems to know about him. So maybe I'll just kind of educate people on him. So, because the weird thing about is some of these early people in this field of medicine is there affiliations with Zionism, right? So here we go. Most people can identify the developers of the world's most important vaccines, including Louis Pasteur, Edward Jenner, and Jonas Salk, which we're going to talk about later. Another example of a hero story that's not so true. But the name Mordecai Valdemar Haffkine, an Orthodox Jew who is credited with the development and use of vaccines against cholera and bubonic plague, has been forgotten, even though he arguably saved far more lives than they did. He was hailed as the Jewish Jenner. He was characterized by Joseph Lister, the pioneer of antiseptic surgery, as a savior of humanity, and in Joseph Hertz's well-known second edition of the Soncino Chumash, the influential chief rabbi of the British Empire noted that he was a famous scientist. The son of a secular merchant father and a devoutly Orthodox mother born in what is now Ukraine, Haffkine was raised by his maternal grandmother after his mother died when he was a young child, and it was through her that he developed strong Jewish feelings. A young founder of the Jewish League for Self-Defense in Odessa, he was injured while defending a Jewish home during the Odessa pogrom of 1881. So considering what's been happening in Ukraine lately and Israel, I just feel like reading this guy's story is probably kind of just relevant, right? It even though it's such a long time ago, it just has like a historical echo of significance. So let's just kind of read into it and see what people think, right? So Haffkine commenced his scientific career as a protozoologist and protistologist at the University of Odessa in 1879 under Eli Mechnikov, one of the fathers of immunology, who shared the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine with Paul Ehrlich. So the interesting thing about the Nobel Prize is how many Nobel Prizes are being shared by either Zionists or Nazis or eugenicists. Just in general, there's a whole statistically significant disproportionate effect of, if you're eugenic, you might get a Nobel Prize. So we should probably shut that fucking thing down, and nobody deserves to ever get another Nobel Prize ever again. It's a fucking black mark on all of us. So he was expelled from the university in 1882 after protesting Mechnikov's forced resignation for being Jewish. But after waging a difficult battle against the administration, he was granted his Doctor of Science degree in 1884. However, he was barred from a professorship because he refused to convert to the Russian Orthodox Church, and the fact that he had always been openly proud of his Judaism, very rare at that time and in those circles, certainly did not help him after leaving Odessa in 1888 for a brief teaching job in Geneva, where he joined his mentor and Louis Pasteur at the newly established Pasteur Institute. In the early 1890s, when one of the 5 great 19th century cholera pandemics devastated Asia and Europe, Haffkine's interest turned to practical bacteriology, and he focused his research on developing a cholera vaccine. He produced an attenuated form of the cholera bacterium and risked his life by self-administering the first dose on July 18th, 1892. This is something that you'll see if they don't, in order to avoid the ethical dilemma of administering it to some gardener's kid, they will often do the extremely dangerous thing of using it on themselves. But what they often do too, you'll notice they'll on themselves and their family, right, first. If it works for them, then they'll have made their family safe first. But they often put their own family at risk to prove their genius, right? So, but then if I guess they hadn't done that, we maybe wouldn't have been able to develop some of the vaccines that have been effective, like the one that did eradicate smallpox, right? So it's to put in context. He reported his successful findings to the Biological Society 2 weeks later, but his discovery was not generally accepted by his senior colleagues. Also, I should mention, just briefly, let's see if I can get into this after this story here. This is something I came across called the Waldmeyer-Haffkine's cholera vaccines and the Farren-Haffkine priority dispute. So as far as the claiming of who deserves credit for who discovered the thing first, this is something I've noticed is a recurring theme with Zionist scientists. Oh, can you guys still hear me? My browser I got a message saying my browser's lost connection to your screen share audio. Not that I was trying to share any audio, but I don't see you guys complaining that I'm muted, so I guess I can just keep going. Hello, Macy. How's it going? Good to see you. I hope I'm not going to bore you guys with my little presentation, but I may have to just kind of steamroll through some information because there's a lot to kind of get through to kind of make my point. So, good. Thank you for letting me know the sound is working. So, anyway, yeah. So, determined to prove the I was taking a break to mention the Haffkine-Farren dispute, and there's a Spanish doctor who seems to have come up with a cholera vaccine that may have worked before him, but there was, the anti-vaxxer public controversy, outrage, kind of shut down his research. But so it seems like this guy maybe got a lot of his, potentially had a jump start in his research, had someone do a lot of the legwork for him, but then that guy did not get the credit. So let's set that record straight, right? Determined to prove the efficacy of his vaccine, he decided that the best place to do so was in India, where hundreds of thousands of people were dying from the ongoing cholera epidemic. In early 1893, he finally obtained permission from the British authorities to go to India and test his vaccines on unwilling, necessarily, subjects of a colonial regime, right? Kind of useful for scientific experiment, unfortunately, for, I digress. At the deltas of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, the primary source for the spread of cholera, but he quickly encountered 4 daunting problems. First, the British directed that all participation in his 2-shot regimen trials be voluntary, effectively thwarting his ability to select a proper balance of subjects and controls so fundamental to scientific analysis. How dare people choose voluntarily to risk themselves, right, in the name of science? So, second, relentless and vociferous protests by English anti-vaccinationists. I find it funny that they mention the English ones, but not the local population, who I'm sure there was plenty of also anti-vaccination sentiment in colonial India. Ultimately, the English anti-vaccinations ultimately took their toll on the British military command and caused a decreased cooperation with, and sometimes obstruction of, Haffkine's efforts. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. Third, when Haffkine was grudgingly granted permission by the British government to test his vaccine in India, he received no financial support from either the British or Indian government, and he had no choice but to fund the entire operation by himself, right? So that's what it is. So it is what it is. But the principal problem proved to be Haffkine's own misunderstanding of the geographical unpredictability of cholera. He planned to choose a village with a history of cholera, vaccinate half the people, and wait for the next outbreak to test the results. But he soon discovered that he was unable to find the disease in sufficient concentration, to make his testing meaningful. Kind of maybe could skip some of this, but then I'd be skipping over details you might like to hear. So, as he documented in his records, although he was able to vaccinate more than about 20,000 people throughout northern India that year, no cholera appeared in their midst to show whether the vaccine was of value or not. Hafkeen's big break came in early 1894 when a medical officer in Calcutta invited him to examine cholera bacilli in a water tank in an isolated village where everyone drank from a shared water source. When cholera broke out in the village, I hope that was not like intentionally placed there, but well, that no need to insinuate that without any proof. When cholera broke out in the village, the overwhelming majority of the deaths were among the unvaccinated. Similar, that's a boilerplate. Heard that before. Calcutta health officials agreed to finance a wider trial, and he became the first person in history to bring laboratory medicine into the slums of a tropical country as he traveled across India, spending entire days vaccinating as many people as possible. What I'm finding is going unsaid in this article is the impact that the colonialization has in even producing the epidemic in the first place, right? So I'm just going to quickly share this tab here. This is Public Health and Sanitation Policies in India, Historical Analysis and Reforms, socio.health, early sanitation efforts under British rule. During the British colonial period, public health and sanitation efforts in India were sporadic and primarily driven by the needs of the British military. In the 18th and 19th centuries, sanitation policies were rudimentary and often limited to military camps and cantonments. The British administration recognized the need to maintain sanitary conditions to protect their troops from diseases, but civilian measures were not consistently applied. One of the major challenges during this time was the lack of infrastructure and resources dedicated to public health for the general population. The British focused on their immediate needs, leaving large sections of the Indian populace vulnerable to disease. And therefore themselves, even though they think that they can just protect themselves and say, fuck you, the people that we think that we can conquer and tell you what to do, right? And then not actually provide you any means to have like healthy lives, right? So the limited efforts that were made often involved basic sanitation measures like waste disposal and water supply management, but those were not standardized or widespread. Blah, blah, blah. Despite those challenges, some notable efforts were made. The focus remained primarily on protecting British interests with little consideration for the broader Indian society. So then they create an epidemic and then they need to kind of call in a colonizer scientist to kind of come up with a wonder drug to solve a problem that maybe wouldn't like be as bad as like, not that they say that epidemics can't happen without colonialism, but people typically not being oppressed and their lives destroyed are better able to stay in good health. So until they didn't really do anything until there was a bubonic plague outbreak, which kind of forced them to do stuff. Plague epidemic, which began in Bombay, rapidly spread to other parts of India, causing widespread panic and mortality. The British administration was forced to take action, leading to the enactment of Epidemic Disease Act of 1897. This act granted authorities the power to implement necessary measures to control the spread of diseases such as quarantine and isolation. The important thing is, at some point, they had to. What I find is important is here. One of the pivotal moments, sorry to kind of get distracted on this tangent, but one of the pivotal moments was the introduction of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms in 1919, which aimed to decentralize governance in India. These reforms transferred some powers from the British central government to provincial governments, giving them authority over public health matters. So rather than having the dictatorial, authoritarian government, centralized government telling everybody how to handle the public health crisis, it seems like one of the things that helped solve the problem ultimately, along with vaccines that work, is this decentralization of authority, right? Letting people with competency manage their regions as they know how. Just have to kind of say that. So back to our story here. Oh, maybe I should check in with you guys here a little bit. How's it going, Sean? Good to see you. Okay, I'll just get back to this. Take a bit of water. So I'm not sure where I jumped out of here. Calcutta health officials agreed to finance a wider trial after they found with their little experiment, observational experiment, that the cholera broke out in the village and most of the unvaccinated got sick. So then they agreed to finance a wider trial, and he became the first person in history to bring laboratory medicines into the slums of a tropical country. That's a very propagandistic statement, but aiming to make a historical statement. So by the time he was forced to return to England in autumn 1875 because he had contracted malaria, I don't know about forced to return or decided you wouldn't feel safe staying in the place where you contracted malaria. But there is something to be said about like people born in more northern climates aren't necessarily, our modern science has demonstrated that our microbiomes and stuff are not really well suited for tropical environments. So it may have been a good move to make. So he had vaccinated some 42,000 people in the face of monumental hardships, including surviving an assassination attempt by Muslim fanatics. So I guess if you want to read up more on this guy, this sounds like he's went through a lot. I think, not sure if it mentions this in this article, but he apparently was in the Russian revolutionary. He had some kind of socialist beliefs when he was younger, and he was involved in what they call the terrorist organization that was involved, I think, with killing that Russian czar guy. But not not the family like Lenin. Hi, sorry. Can you guys hear me? Whoa, what the hell? That's weird. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Am I back? I don't know what happened. I think I just lost connection. I'm having really bad connection issues. My computer, I don't understand what's wrong with it. I need to get some help. Yeah, I hope you guys still can. I hope I'm back, or whatever. But um, my computer is all fucked, right? I think I need a new one. My memory is like super high use, and I got an external hard drive to take a whole bunch of stuff off of it. So I shouldn't really have that issue, but I do. And I got a bunch of antivirus stuff to test for viruses. And as far as what I can tell, it's uh, not a virus unless it's a sneaky one. But so I think it's just my computer is falling apart. This on the inside, it's getting old. So you say that's better. Hello, Sakamoto. Here's up, all just popping in to say what's up. What's up? Good to see you. Thanks for saying hi. Feel free to watch this episode later if you like. Just kind of more of a dry reading, academic kind of thing. So I understand people aren't that interested, but let me try and get back to where I was going because I had a bunch of stuff that I was trying to say. Um, share my screen here. I maybe didn't need to go into depth on this whole story, but then just kind of want to demonstrate that, like, not entirely like anti-vaccination, right? If a vaccine works, it's proven to work, then it's an effective tool along with other strategies, right? But then people like to dismiss the ethical concerns that are valid along the way. So I don't like that people do that. And the fact that we might have not such a scientific understanding the of how these things work, where it doesn't mean that you don't have a good ethical understanding of the problems that are associated with the scientific things that are taking place. Does that make sense? Right. I don't know where this tab that I'm trying to fucking find happened to go. I have to find it. I will find it. There it is. Okay, good. And hello, old man Barker. Saying, been listening to and arguing about Ukraine with a bunch of dipshits that should know better. Yeah, well, part of what inspired me to do this is arguing a bunch of dipshits about the COVID stuff. So I'll get into a little bit more the Jewish connection to the modern vaccines, but I just kind of want to establish that there is a very long trend of certain groups of people who potentially have a very racist view of the people that they are designing so-called medical interventions for. I don't think that that's an acceptable conflict of interest. If you have like a racial hatred against the people that you are designing your medical interventions for, you have a motive for murder and whatnot and that kind of thing. I'm just saying that's kind of conspiratorial, whatever. Take that as you will. So I think that's fair. So right. So here, it is an astounding success. The Aga Khan provided a building to house Hafkine's plague research laboratory, where he offered himself and thousands of members of his community for vaccination. Within a year, hundreds of thousands of Indians have been successfully inoculated. At her 1897 Diamond Jubilee honors, he was named by Queen Victoria as an Order of the Indian Empire for his bubonic plague vaccine. The Jewish Chronicle noted with great pride, the anomaly of a Ukraine Jew trained in the schools of European science saves the lives of Hindus and Mohammedans and is decorated by the descendant of William the Conqueror and Alfred the Great. So that's kind of like I'm saying. Like, this guy seems to have had quite the like right place, right time, or whatever. Seems to have left a mark on history, and nobody like knows who he is. So now you do. And it's ironic as fuck a little bit, right? Like the colonial irony, if that's a term, right? Trained in the schools of European science, saves the lives of the Hindus and Mohammedans, decorated by the conquerors. So use them as their experiments. This is the way, whitewash their what they did, patted themselves on the back. So Halfkind wanted to test his cholera vaccine in Russia, but the Russian Tsarist government refused, preferring that countless thousands of peasants and laborers die rather than be treated by a Jew. Well, that's kind of maybe an oversimplification, but probably part of what was going on. We know how the pogroms in Russia were going on, just like in other places like Poland and stuff. So ironically, however, with the 1893 cholera outbreak raging through the Russian Empire, two of his Russian colleagues visited him in Bombay, with the result that the vaccine called Halfkind's Limp saved many thousands of lives across Russia. By the early 20th century, the vaccine had been administered to over 4 million Indians. So that's the whole thing about, like, even if they say no, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. That's kind of like against people's, my body, my choice, whatever. I don't care about your consent. Halfkind had many enemies, including envious and resentful establishment scientists and the British colonial bureaucracy, particularly the British officers who comprised most of the staff at his laboratory, were all unhappy about a Russian Jew heading the operation. Sham but nonetheless damaging, reports began to circulate, including rumors that he was a Russian secret agent, an enemy of the British colonial rule, and reports that he had produced a vaccine with pig flesh, an anathema to both Hindus and Muslims. It's just kind of like, it's crazy who people are, right? We're so proud of our traditions, right? Our national, whatever, whatever identity, and it always leads to such fucking mess, right? Always a reason to hate each other, right? The haters soon succeeded in finding a way to ruin him when, during a mass outdoor inoculation in the Punjabi village of Malkawal on October 30, 1902, 19 villagers died from tetanus. It's quickly determined that the cause of the death was the failure of an Indian assistant to follow Halfkind's established sterilization and sanitation procedures after he dropped the forceps that he was using to open the vaccine bottles. I don't know if I should just kind of keep reading this because it's a pretty long article. I should probably get to some of the rest of what I was trying to say. Other than maybe I wanted to point out that Halfkind was a proud Orthodox Jew with close relationships with many Jewish and Zionist leaders, but it was his friendship with Baron Edmund Rothschild that gave him the idea for a plan to resettle Jews in Eretz Israel that involved the purchase of land by wealthy members of the Jewish community. So I don't really care how wonder vaccine boy you are, how impressive your scientific talents are. Politically speaking, if you kind of support that kind of stuff, that's not okay, right? Two things can be true at the same time. So moving on, because I'm going to bore you guys and I'm not even going to make my point. I'm going to get distracted, right? So this is some of the stuff that I can't read because, like, the whole thing, because they got whatever, paywall it, make you be a member and shit. So I'm not into that, whatever. But if you just look around at the abstracts of these things, it's sloppy, whatever, as far as academic rigor, but you can glean some interesting little things. You can kind of put together, connect a few dots, So this article discusses the role that eugenics plays in Jewish life. This demonstrates that academic people are doing research into these kinds of things. So if you want to, you can look into their work instead of just listen to what I'm saying. So this article discusses the role that eugenics plays in Jewish life, especially in shaping how Jews confronted the world, and engages Jewish and non-Jewish researchers alike. It discusses the socioeconomic conditions in which Jews lived as it had specific eugenic consequences. It also describes the breeding problems that occupy an important role in Jewish life. The rationale of eugenics in Jewish life depends on the extent to which social, political, religious, or cultural distinctiveness is considered to reflect biological racial factors. So basically, when I read this, I read between the lines and I see, so the more Zionist a Jewish person sees themselves or affiliates themselves as, the closer they get to the eugenic problems that are associated with that political paradigm shift. So this article further draws comparison between old and new eugenics and states that new eugenics depends on screening healthy carriers, prenatal diagnosis, and selective determination of affected fetuses. It ends with a discussion of the importance of Jewish tradition and the continuation of Jewish culture, and mentions that reproduction in eugenics has played a significant role in core Jewish practices and debates. So what I'm kind of showing about the way that they talk about Gentiles can't drink wine even from a Gentile, that is a reflection of the eugenic mentality, whatever the influence, the role that eugenics plays in Jewish tradition, right? So it's not like, oh, you anti-Semitic or whatever, uneducated, whatever, anti-Semite, right? No, this is a valid point to bring up, and it's not just the problem with Jewish faith. It has the same problem with Hindu supremacists, and Catholics or Christians have their own problems with eugenics too, right? It seems like religion itself might have problems with eugenics. Spiritual eugenics. That's kind of, I'll get into the Catholic, the difference between, because I guess there's different types, right? There's positive, negative, spiritual, whatever. All different shades of gray, right? So I guess I will show you next. This tab, I showed you about the Waldemar, the Farren-Halfkind priority dispute. If you're wondering what that is, it was about giving credit where credit's due, right? Because it seems like this guy had his work plagiarized. This guy, Spanish doctor Jaime Ferran y Clua. Again, pardon my pronunciation. I don't really know how to pronounce a lot of words that are not English. I'm wondering, there my tabs are. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of just skip by a lot of stuff. So I apologize if this is a little bit missing a lot of background detail, but I'm trying not to bore people to death. There's a lot people want to be interested in. You can do up some research yourself. But I'll just quickly read this to show you what I'm talking about, that this Halfkind guy maybe had this other guy's work to work off of. So, and this is translated from Spanish. So if it sounds weird, the English, it's because the machine translation makes it hard to understand. So in 1817, the Jaime Ferran y Clua conceived the first idea about his micro telephone and manages to connect the telephone with the devices he built. His offices with Ebro Observatory. So before he was a microbiologist, he was a brilliant guy because he could he was working with that Pauli guy as a Johann Pauli, like these important chemists, to do instantaneity in the photograph, in which he reveals a method of emulsifying silver bromide. So there's some of these, which an invention which later enriched the Kodak house. So it's like some of these people are pretty brilliant, and they're like Renaissance men. They get interested in several different topics, even though like their universities, whatever, are garbage back in the day compared to how advanced. Even though universities today can be garbage too, or whatever. But I'm just saying, like, the standards for education have gotten much better. But some of these people back in the day, when you read about them, they're pretty smart, right? So, in spite of that lack of education, right, or rigorous economic standards. So he became interested in microbiology with research of Pasteur, and in 1884 he gives the Madrid Academy of Medicine a report on parasitism bacterial, which produces sensation. He dedicates himself fully to research on cholera, achieving after multiple experiences in animals and finally in man discovering the vaccine that immunized against bacillus. March 31st, 1885, he communicated his discoveries to the Paris Academy of Sciences. He himself tests his vaccine, ingesting a dose of culture, making his family ingest it, leaving all immune from the experiment. For these reasons, the governor of Valencia leads to its region where cholera wreaks havoc. There he makes more than 30,000 vaccines. However, a strong campaign by Spanish professionals was unleashed against him. He finds sympathizers among the foreign scientific community. So this is where I'm saying there's evidence that people could have heard about his work and then plagiarized some of his ideas, right? The minister Romero Robledo issues a royal order by which no one will be able to apply the vaccine Ferran other than more than himself, and in the presence of a government delegate, which it hurts Ferran's sensitivity, who decided to radically suspend the vaccines, resulting in the deaths of more than 150,000 people of cholera. Kind of counterfactual to claim, because you can't know that the vaccines would have saved them if you didn't administer them, kind of thing, but whatever, fair point. So several foreign investigators are trying to dispute his priority in the invention, and has to sustain harsh controversies from which it emerges victorious. In 1886, he discovered the antitrust vaccine that he applied to some Barcelona sewer workers. I don't know what weird translation, makes no sense to me. But the following year, the City Council of Barcelona founds the Anti-Rabies Institute, second created after Pasteur's in Paris. So Louis Pasteur gets a lot of credit for being the one to discover the rabies vaccine. But there's other people who do the work that don't get the credit. And the way the history is told, it kind of oversimplifies things, and I don't like that. Whatever, it distorts our understanding of science. So, discovering the methods he calls super intensive. Ferron to differentiate it from Pasteur's intensive, and that simplifies and improves treatment. So he improves on Pasteur's work, and then, but because there's a lot of anti-vaccine kind of controversy, just like today, his work's not getting recognized because there is also like Pasteur's not the one who came up with the cholera vaccine. I don't really have the receipt, but I'm pretty sure in spite of him being maybe the revolutionary guy that article was saying about learning from the Talmud how to do the technique or whatever, he was not the one to come up with the actually successful product. And people kind of gloss over that, right? So treatment is widespread throughout Spain, and they are many thousands immunized against rabies without a single failure. Gradually, he makes various wise men recognize the priority of the Ferron's discoveries and its application. So he maintained a close friendship with King Alfonso, very interested in his experiments and conclusions, received some honors, but suffered terrible persecutions from his companions, pseudoscientists, and spiteful people. Then he died in Barcelona without his enormous contributions. Okay, that's done with that. Sorry to bore you guys. I'm kind of going to miss my point if I don't really tie it together here. But that's where I was trying to actually demonstrate the Catholics, not just the Zionists, right? Because I'm trying to remember the reason why I'm telling you this stuff, right? So Pasteur was a Catholic, Ferron was a Catholic, and then there's the other scientists have different faiths, right? And they kind of get their ideas from each other. So as much as they're like the lay people are antagonistic and like hate each other because of their faith or whatever, these scientists seem to be happy to work together and use what they're doing on us, right? So we have to have faith in them. Whatever. Anyway, just another person to point out is Gregor Mendel is really important. The Mendelian genetics or whatever. So he was an Augustinian friar, credited with founding the science of genetics, right? And I was looking into his history because you can kind of do a lot of this with all these historical figures. You can try and look into their family background, but the information's not really there. And you're kind of trying to look at private information about, was his mother and father Jewish, right? What is his name have some Jewish connection historically? And I think that he probably does have some like, I think the name Mendel or whatever, there is probably a Jewish association in that history. There is a lot of in Europe, you call it a crypto Jew, right? Where they had all these persecutions. A lot of these Jews converted to Catholicism or whatever, right? In order to avoid persecution. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're looking into who was historically significant in the advancement of science or whatever. And you get this recurring theme, right? Like this Ashkenazi bloodline kind of thing going on. So there's that. And then I wanted to kind of get into this too. Nostra Aetate in our time, or the Declaration on the Relation of the Church with Non-Christian Religions, is an official declaration of the Vatican. It was promulgated on the 28th of October 1965 by Pope Paul VI. And what it is following an approach by Jules Isaac, a French-born Jew, is associated with the Sealisburg Conference, in which he claimed that Christian anti-Semitism had prepared the way for the Holocaust. A sympathetic Pope John endorsed the creation of a document which would address a new, less adversarial approach to the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Rabbinic Judaism. What is extremely noteworthy about that would be, in and of itself, that would just be kind of like a good thing, right? Nice rapprochement, right? But then, what are we? Less adversarial approach between the Catholic Church and the Zionists, who are in the middle of the Arab-Israeli conflict in full swing. The governments of the Arab world, in particular, vocally lobbied against this document, and they still kind of had to do it anyways, because this is one of those things that can be very kind of conspiratorial to try and, like, what am I trying to say with this? Jewish organizations such as the American Jewish Committee and B'nai B'rith And the World Jewish Congress also lobbied for their side with the assistance of liberal clergymen. After going through numerous drafts, compromises were made, and a statement was added on Islam to mollify the security concerns of the Arab Christians, which obviously they didn't really actually respect. They clearly still, they just added a statement that meant nothing. And finally, statements on Eastern religions, Buddhism, and Hinduism were added. Originally, Nostra Aetate was only supposed to focus on the relationship between the Catholic Church and Judaism. So what is this, whatever? To me, I see like an alliance made by the Pope with the Zionists, and it really shows in things like this, right? This is, I had to shout out Pasta Jardula and Fiorella because they were the ones who I was watching one of, I think it was Pasta to Go with, what's it called? That homeless, whatever, leftist, I don't know. You know what I'm saying, right? So anyway, they had some good takes on, they did some really good work back in 2022 about this, the bad shit that was going on with Pfizer and these mRNA shots, right? And so if you want to dive back into what the horrible anti-vaxxers have been saying or whatever, like they got some really good work that's like nails these guys to the wall about how criminal they were with the pandemic, right? So it's interesting when we're looking at in context of what I just said about that Nostra Aetate thing, forming a nice alliance between the Vatican and the Zionists. And then we got, oh, I forgot actually, before I get into this, sorry guys, my bad. This is an important article I should have read. This one's maybe more important than some of the other ones I was reading, but the Jewish connection to the COVID vaccines. Let me just make sure you guys can see that. Okay, good. This is the COVID vaccines. Meet Michael Dolston, the Jewish immigrant leading Pfizer's vaccine charge. So they're just, this may turn out to be one of the biggest. This is what they always, okay. This is one of those things, the Zionists are kind of behind everything. And it's really scary how they've managed to do that to us, right? This is, sorry, I'm looking for the date, November 24th, 2020. Okay. Dolston, who moved to the New York area from Sweden in 2004, is far from the only Jewish immigrant in his field. In fact, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla is a Jew from Thessaloniki, Greece. They're also Zionists, right? Israel is very integral in the vaccine, mRNA, kind of all that. So the chief medical officer for Moderna, competing drug maker that announced Monday that its COVID-19 vaccine was nearly 95% effective, is an Israeli immigrant named Tal Zaks. And then Albert Bourla's infamous now for this video that he had released that they were wiping off of Twitter and YouTube and whatever the hell about saying how those shots are not effective at all. Whoops, my bad. We claim they were 95% effective, but they actually don't work at all. Whoops, sorry. Anyway, the scientist responsible for the pioneering breakthroughs that allowed for the development of an mRNA vaccine in University of Pennsylvania, Professor Drew Weissman, who is Jewish and once worked under Fauci at the National Institutes of Health. Fauci, Roman Catholic. Okay, interesting. Particularly ironically, when you think about the Zionists in the porn industry and this, like, the fetish, this idea that there's this fetish between the Roman Catholic girl and the Jewish guy. Anyway, I just find all of this kind of there's too much coincidence. Sorry if I'm offending anyone. But his home wasn't very religiously observant, but he visited Israel several times growing up, something that helped inspire him to spend nearly a year of his doctoral studies at the renowned Weizmann Institute just south of Tel Aviv. He trained as a physician and began his career on the medical faculty at the University of Lund. But his experience in Israel, learning about cutting-edge immunology, helped inspire his turn to pharmaceutical science. And Israel's getting closer and closer to being actually held accountable by the international community. And what do? They hold the international community hostage with, I'm just going to have to stop there before I say something I'm not allowed to say, right, on a platform. So there's a homegrown connection to Moderna. Its chief medical officer, Dr. Tal Zaks, was raised in Israel and received his MD and PhD from Ben Gurion University of the Negev. So that's Moderna and Pfizer. Like those are the two big players. And then their AstraZeneca, I'll get into, has its own eugenic links. They're all these people are in bed together, right? All these people that work at GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi, right? They've got Zionists working in as medical officers in all these companies. So I hope that concerns other people too. Okay, because genocidal maniacs, I don't trust making medicine for me. Thank you very much. Okay. Israel was one of the first countries that believed in us. Zach told Globes the advance that Israel paid helped to build the company's production lines. Okay. So they need to be held accountable for pretending like they're going to save the world, and then they just experiment on people that they have no respect for, right? So back to this article. Pfizer and the Vatican. Let me just check in on you guys, see how you're doing. Yeah, Rondo saying Jesuits and Scientologists are like peas and carrots. Yeah, I don't know. Remember that guy Carnation? I forget his name. He's always talking about the Jesuits. He's in all these chats. He kind of inspires me a little bit to do this too, because he's not. He might sound a little bit off if he's only focusing like everything's every nail. When you hold a hammer, everything looks like a nail or whatever. But people should look into like Jesuits and their influence on historical events, because it's kind of creepy, right? So the Jewish connection to Cosa Nostra is very well documented, right? So it's just one of these things that people, if you didn't know about it, you should know about it. It's interesting, and it's not over, right? It's still affecting us to this day. It's like you learn about the mafia. It's an interesting thing to read about, and then you learn, oh, the mafia is actually still in control of the economy or my local economy, or oh, I might have to actually do something about that. Oh fuck! Now it's not just not just information, academically interesting or whatever. It's pragmatically relevant information. So I guess Choosy was right. Yeah, Choosy, Carnation, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, credit where credit's due. I don't know if he's been saying it in a way that people understand or whatever, but if you do the digging or whatever, there's a connection there. So there's a reason a lot of Zios are bankers or lawyers or managers. Damn, the Nazis to this day are really good at making the Jewish people look bad. Yeah, well, and some of the Zionists, right, they don't do themselves any favors. So the Pharisees, this conspiracy has been going on for a while. Yeah, it's like this. The eugenic mentality is really, really old, actually, right? Just like when you talk about the Hindu caste system, it just they had eugenic tendencies before there was a word for it, right? And then people like to kind of connect it to Plato and stuff, and then skip over the Christians and the. I'm sure there's Muslim eugenics too. I haven't looked into that topic, right? We'll save that one for another day. But it's all about controlling who breeds with who, and that's creepy as fuck. So someone said in another chat, Bernie is a beacon of light in the darkness. Personally, I think Bernie likes to keep it dark so he can be a beacon of light. Yeah. I don't want to, I get distracted. I don't like to give Bernie any attention at all. But fuck that guy, right? Fucking classic example of a person who pretends to be on your side and then stabs you right in the back, if not like your eye. So they think Jesuits are like liberals and peaceful. I'm a holy man of God, right? But more like devil, right? So and Pope Francis is a Jesuit, yeah. So and Pope Francis, I don't know if I got a receipt on that one. I think he met with some of these top people developing these vaccines and stuff. they have like the Vatican has like scientists come to counsel them, right? So some of these like top-notch eugenicists are going to communicate with the Pope and shit directly, and they don't want to tell you what they're talking about, right? So like this, we'll get this article. We'll get into this one. Sources say Pope Francis met privately twice last year with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla. From January 15, 2022, Vatican City. The Register has learned that Pope Francis privately held undisclosed meetings with the CEO of Pfizer last year as questions arise over the efficacy of the vaccines in preventing transmission, which are now being mandated for all vaccine staff and visitors. Oh shit, our scam is not working very well. What are we going to do? Whatever, we got to talk about it, right? So, according to Vatican sources, the Holy Father twice met Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla at the Vatican, although the precise details are not known. Unlike most papal private audiences, these meetings were not announced by the Holy See press office, which did not respond to repeated quests to confirm the meetings. And I'm sure the Vatican is well aware of how many people have all kinds of conspiracies about global domination, whatever, and Freemasons and stuff, and they don't care that this kind of behavior just makes them look suspicious as hell. I guess they feel they are unaccountable. So Bourla's meetings with the Pope would not be the first such unannounced papal encounter in recent years. In November 2019, shortly before the COVID-19 health emergency began, the Pope privately received Melinda Gates. The meeting, well known in the Vatican, was not announced and has never been officially acknowledged. So very holy of you, right? That's kind of all I needed to point out with that one. Feel free to search up these articles yourself. Let me just get on, not so much just about Zionist eugenics, but let's get into that eugenics and Roman Catholicism. Okay. Little has been written about religion vis-a-vis eugenics, and even less on Roman Catholicism and eugenics. A 1930 papal encyclical, Casti Connubii, is usually held by historians to have been the official condemnatory view of the Catholic Church on eugenics, and the document is further supposed to have induced the only organized opposition to eugenic legislative efforts in several countries, especially France. In fact, the encyclical was not directly about eugenics, but a general statement of the Catholic doctrine on marriage. Pardon me. This article attempts to clarify the issue of a Catholic position on eugenics by re-examining the encyclical itself, as well as its contemporaneous reception in Germany and France, where there was a strong Catholic presence. Casti Connubii introduced a change in the prescribed hierarchy of the aims of marriage when, for the first time, relations between spouses took precedent over procreation. While condemning the means, abortion, sterilization, etc., the encyclical did not condemn positive eugenics. So that's one of the things where Catholic propaganda would essentially have you believe that this Catholic proclamation was wasn't intended to be a condemnation of eugenics, but it can be read that way. But it's important to recognize that it's maybe at best just a condemnation of negative eugenics from a spiritual perspective. In the broader context of the history of eugenics, the reception of the encyclical emphasizes the family as the third entity between the individual and society. Eugenics as a religious utopia of modernity developed a hegemonic discourse over the family realm. As such, it entered into competition with more traditional religious institutions such as the Roman Catholic Church. So that in and of itself isn't exactly a smoking gun. But then when I share this tab here, when you look at what's called Hispanic eugenics, which I think should be called Catholic eugenics, because Hispanic eugenics are a positive eugenics based around the political purification of a people, developed in Spain during the interwar period and put into practice in the Spanish Civil War, eventually being made into political policy in Francoist Spain. The concept was first expounded upon in the 1930s by men like Antonio Vallejo Nayera and Gregorio Marañón. It was heavily influenced by Roman Catholicism. Much of this was realized through Francoist policies around the role of women and their bodies. So maybe the popes, whatever pious, I forget their name, had some kind of opposition to Nazi eugenics based on whatever reasons that they had, but I feel like even that was kind of fake. But because they didn't, from what I remember, the Pope guy didn't exactly come outright condemn the Nazi atrocities until things really got to until everyone was condemning it, and then they kind of had to save face. But as much as they have their pathetic challenging of Hitler's eugenics, it seems like they didn't have any problem with Franco's eugenics, right? So everyone knows they're both fascists, right? So this is what I'm saying. The Catholic Church didn't seem to, maybe does not to this day really seem to mind fascists, right? That's a problem. Should be for Catholics, but and then there's this here. Spiritual eugenics is part of the Irish carceral archipelago. Institutionalization has played a key role in Irish social policy. However, there's still a lack of clarity regarding the relationship between the governing structures and those who ran the institutions, such as the Catholic convent institutions for fallen women. Specifically, a question remains as to the precise logic for transferring girls and women into these settings. This paper expands the debate by exploring the existence of Catholic convent industries in Ireland through the lenses of spiritual eugenics in the early 20th century. In contrast to Anglo-American eugenic practices based on sterilization and birth control, Latin eugenic practices accepted by the Catholic Church were based on removing women from temptation and may have produced a necessary commitment to long-term closed institutions. The paper offers a brief description of the differences between eugenics aimed at biological fitness and the practices aimed at spiritual promotion. So there is a bit of a nuance there that I think is worth kind of talking about, because I've noticed in the modern discourse with like the COVID stuff, there seems to be a weird, like that Spider-Man meme where everyone's pointing at each other, and it's kind of like no, you don't know who's the real one. Like I've been calling people eugenic, like I've been calling out eugenic tendencies that I've seen in people apparently on the left, and they've been calling me a eugenic at the same time. And it's kind of like neither side. I don't see myself as eugenic. They don't see themselves as eugenic, but we see eugenic practices in the way that we're defending our arguments. So how does that happen? And I kind of think where it's like, depending on whatever ideological leanings you might have, it may be that you're more against the Anglo-American type of based on sterilization and birth control or whatever. So that's kind of what you see as eugenics, and that's what you attack as eugenics, right? But then you're vulnerable to this more spiritual kind of this other, like the Francoist eugenics based around the political purification of a people, because there was some eugenics in the Soviet Union too. So we're like socialists. This is what I think. One of the things that will prevent communism from taking place, if there are things that make it the revolution not happen, I think is allowing eugenic thought processes and principles to have a place within revolutionary thought, right? Like within revolutionary theory. I think we need to purge eugenics from our theoretical and our practical like attempts at revolution in order for it to be successful, because I think that's one of those things that people think is like something that we need, like this technocratic kind of focus in order to make the revolution happen. I feel like we need to make it about the people again, make it about achieving a real proletarian kind of democracy. And we can't really do that if we're letting eugenics get in the way, right? It's like, do you want communism or do you want eugenics, right? And sometimes people think you can have both. I think sometimes they're mutually exclusive. I think that this is the case with that. So and then here, just finally to wrap that one up here, why did the Catholic Church support Franco? The Catholic Church supported Franco for several reasons. First, they portrayed the war in Spain as a holy one against godless communists, and called for Catholics in other countries to support the nationalists against the Republicans. Additionally, the Catholic Church had a close and mutually beneficial association with the Franco regime. The loyalty of the Church to the Francoist state lent legitimacy to the dictatorship, while Franco's fascist government aligned itself with Spain's Catholic Church. So they give each other legitimacy, right? Even though neither of them are legitimate or whatever, a bunch of just genocidal maniacs, right? So throughout Spain's history, the established church culture had been inseparable from Spanish identity, and Catholicism was taught in all schools. Moreover, Pope Pius publicly blessed Franco as the defender of the Catholic faith against the atheism of the communists. Even though the communists have, in a lot of ways, changed their stance on religion, and I feel personally a little bit can be a little too sympathetic towards religious religious revolutionaries in a sense. Like they kind of let their religion take precedence over like the class analysis stuff, and that's one of those things that will prevent a revolution from taking place. Like if we think that what we have to do is genuflect, right? If we have to be cucks to the religious, cabals, thinking that we're going to curry their favor, we may just be preventing our revolution, like making ourselves counter-revolutionary, like shooting ourselves in the foot. In a kind of liberalist, like play nice kind of catch more flies with honey kind of attitude, right? But then we've seen how that kind of pacifistic attitude doesn't necessarily actually play out in reality. Like it would be nice in a perfect world if we could just be nice to people and that would get them on our side, then great. But that's kind of disregarding their contradictions that are actually problematic, and their bigotry, right, that is actually problematic. So let me just see how you guys are doing there. You see Tim MC, a good standard of living for all life on earth before a greedy few get to have it all minimum. Yeah, it's doesn't sound like it should be the hardest thing, right? The problem is trying to improve living conditions. You do have to kind of wrestle with this eugenic thing, right? It's people, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So it's unfortunately people don't even realize that we're just trying to help people, trying to cure people from disease, right? It's like, but then you also, like when you talk about how people don't understand how they're discriminating against disability and disabled people, you're trying to erase disabled people with like medical marvels and stuff. That's kind of not okay, but you're not actually trying to help people, right? You're trying to erase people. So Grapentine saying there were some communist, Marxist, friendly Catholic leaders before, so I hear communism, socialism is moral and righteous, so no wonder it comes naturally in many people. Yeah, well, Catholicism, like I think the word itself means like universal, right? Something like that. But it just doesn't work, right? The way that the Catholic, like the Catholic faith on paper versus what it is in reality, they're two very different things, right? Like it's been a corrupt institution for centuries, and so even if with your idealism, you would like it to be what it is not. It is what it is. It is not what it wants to be, what it portrays itself to be, right? So, and not to say that individual like pastors or something can't do revolutionary deeds like feed the poor and stuff, right? It's just like that whole thing, like all cops are bad kind of thing. Like you can't necessarily do good from the inside in such a corrupt system. You need a new system. You need to convince people to give up on stop beating a dead horse, not encouraging them to try and bring the Frankenstein horse back to life with eugenics, right? So the Muridia is an example of a religious tradition being utilized for revolutionary movements. So I never heard that term, so I'll try and remember that one and look into that. That sounds interesting, Rondo. There's plenty of stuff that I don't know. I have my biases for sure. So one of the phrases the bad guy in the US version of Utopia says to his family is, "What did you do to earn your place in the crowded world?" Yeah, that's I forget who it is now, but one of the worst eugenic quotes that are out there is about somebody saying, trying to come up with a system about we need to be asking people every 5 years about what have you done to prove your value to society, and if you can't come up with a justifiable answer, then they should be exterminated. I forget who that was, but that's someone who did actually say that, right? So let me just check on time. We're an hour and a half, so I'm just gonna kind of keep going. Hopefully you guys are interested. I see I still got 9 watchers, so I'm not so boring that everyone's decided to run away. So thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you for that link. I will check that out later, Rondo. There's that for anyone who wants to do a bit of light reading with me at some point offline. So now I just wanted to talk about smallpox, because this to me sounds like a story that is not being told very, very well. It seems like people who lived it, I see, you're welcome, Sean. People who lived through these times understand this like the effort to eradicate smallpox, like in a way that us young people who were not alive at that time, we're never gonna really understand it as intrinsically, right? So I'm trying to understand. There are so many diseases out there that have been around for centuries or thousands of years. They've been trying to get rid of it, and they like and then modern science comes around, and for hundreds of years we still can't get rid of it, like influenza. And then but smallpox, it seems kind of too good to be true that they managed to eradicate it in like 11 years. So how is that possible? Well, the dirty secret, I think, is like fascism, imperialism was kind of like the only way. Like they had to be authoritarian. They had to force people to, or they had to violate the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of other nations, impoverished nations that the imperialists impoverish, or whatever. They utilized the situation and the leverage that they had to be the one to deliver the cure and take the propaganda win, the soft power win of being like back in the day. Like the US is so evil now, they would never even be satisfied with actually using a cure to gain people's respect so they can continue their imperialistic whatever wet dreams. But anyway, this is the World Health Assembly declared the world free of smallpox May 8th, 1980. The triumph of science, the incredible story of smallpox eradication. So there's a whole bunch of backstory stuff, but then this is just to share this briefly with you. This is like all that it really. I wanted to highlight this because it just says WHO began planning efforts to eradicate smallpox in 1959, but the campaign fell short due to a lack of resources, funding, and global commitment. And then they fast forward. In 1967, efforts were revived through the Intensified Eradication Program. And then they just say vaccine research developments, advances in surveillance and mass vaccination programs across the globe contributed to the success of the program. End of story. How the hell do you tell me that you just told the story there when you just, like, you could read the rest of this and you're kind of like wasting your time or whatever. They glossed over all the important parts or whatever in one paragraph, right? So I'm not really going to get into this whole deep dive because it's just a sort of side thing that I noted while I was reading up on the rest of this stuff. But then I'll show you Donald Ainsley Henderson. This is the guy who's like really pivotal in this story of eradicating smallpox. He was an American physician who directed a 10-year international effort that eradicated smallpox throughout the world and launched international childhood vaccination programs. From 1977 to 1990, he was dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Later, he played a leading role in instigating national programs for public health preparedness and response following biological attacks and national disasters. So basically, this is the guy who we can thank for eradicating smallpox in a sense. But then let's look at the details. What do we notice? Okay. Henderson served as chief of the CDC virus disease surveillance programs from 1960 to 1965, working closely with epidemiologist Alexander Langmuir, During this period, he and his unit developed a proposal for a USAID program to eliminate smallpox and control measles during a 5-year period in 18 contiguous countries in Western and Central Africa. This project was funded by USAID with field operations beginning in 1967. So, while they may actually be solving a genuine health problem that we want solved, is like, well, I may be against eugenics, but I don't want people to suffer with smallpox, right? Like, if there's a cure that's been developed, I want people to be healthy and not to die, right? Like, but recognize how someone like the evil American government will be happy to take the credit, or whatever, to prevent anyone else from really being able to to coordinate something like this. And then they're gonna, American capitalism and imperialism saves the day, right? Like a superhero movie, right? The other thing I want to point out, like, they're going to use what you call vaccine imperialism in Africa, right? So there's certain countries that have this problem, or this is a vulnerability that they can use to exploit these countries and have leverage over them, right? Just from a realpolitik kind of a cold-blooded political perspective, that's definitely what was going on there. I'm pretty sure, right? But other thing to point out is this was happening in the middle of the Cold War. So I find it pretty impressive that, or suspicious, that in the middle of the Cold War, they managed to eradicate smallpox when they're worried about nuclear annihilating each other. So that's kind of like, need to watch a documentary. Someone can find recommendations or sources for me to read up on this. I would find it very interesting to read about how, as much as everyone thinks that the Soviet Union and the U.S. government were mortal enemies throughout the Cold War, how did they manage to cooperate on epidemiology, on vaccine science and stuff like that? Because it seems like they definitely did. So let me get back to this. Oh, and Rondo, I'm convinced AIDS and HIV are bioweapons. Well, I got a little tidbit on that. If we can get to that, I might have to leave out some of it because it's kind of so much to talk about. But maybe I'll briefly hop onto that while you're mentioning it right here. Because first of all, there's AZT. That's AZT thing is more the bioweapon. But then, in the name of helping people, we're going to give them a toxic thing and then say that because they're going to die anyways, we might as well try and give them something we would never give to anyone else, right? So at the end of 1989, 2 years after we had started about the truly bad and corrupt science surrounding untreated. But how do they do that? They make up bullshit, whatever, science for approval, saying that it does not kill faster than the natural progression, and then they disregard the advisors who say that that's not really true, and they push it forward for regulatory approval anyway. Short story, right? A long story made short. So AZT had been an abandoned cancer drug, discarded because of its fatal toxicity, resurrected in a cynical belief that AIDS patients were going to die anyway. So trying it out was sort of like playing with the house's money. Because the drug didn't require the usual massively expensive research and trial processes, having gone through that years earlier, it was insanely profitable for its maker, Burroughs Wellcome. Okay, this is one of those names you really need to understand is a big player. Okay, the Wellcome, I'll get into it later, right? But the Wellcome Trust is what's the eugenic link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Oxford University and these companies, right? Like, the all the breadcrumbs all lead right to the, you know what I'm saying? Like the evidence is there. It's just people have to do the reading and believe what it says, right? So it was a tragically perfect storm of windfall profits, something to pacify AIDS activists and the media, and a convenient boom to the patent holders for HIV testing. So there is that. But then there's this other tab. Where did HIV come from? I don't maybe know if it's a bioweapon, Rondo, as much as it is. I noticed doing this reading here, it's kind of has to do with colonialism changing the landscape in Africa, right? First of all, chimpanzees hunting was rare before the arrival of firearms in the region. One study had suggested that chimpanzee hunting intensified during the First World War when a Franco-Belgian occupying force seized southern Cameroon from the German occupiers. So that's one. The people's behaviors change because of colonial, whatever, imperialist intervention. But this right here with reused unsterilized needles and syringes, this is where I really think that there's like kind of the covered up. Oh, have you lost my audio? Oh, just my browser lost connection to the screen share audio, but I guess you guys can still hear me. But so what I think that they're not telling you about HIV, they're letting all these conspiracy theories kind of distort the picture on purpose. I think that like the white colonial workers that were giving people, they were using reusable syringes and stuff, and they should have known better, and they were giving people HIV and stuff and maybe other illnesses, because like when you look into when, like it's really important, you ask like when did they get evidence start coming in that you can't reuse needles, it's not safe, it's not healthy, right? They were kind of learning this in the late 1890s that we were reading about, right? With all these Louis Pasteur and all these people, like with all of the stuff that they're doing, they were learning that you had to, like the things that they were arguing about, you had to boil the stuff in order to purify it, in order to get a vaccine that works, right? They're learning all that stuff. And then they go to Africa in like the 1920s, 1950s, or whatever, and they act like they don't know what they're learning in Europe, okay? And then they infect the population, kind of like giving the smallpox blankets to people. And they use germ warfare, not just the bio, like making a bio weapon or whatever, just harnessing an already deadly pathogen or something against an unsuspecting population. Okay, so let me just kind of read what I've got here. What caused HIV to spread? If HIV-1 group M reached the human population by the 1920s, why did it take so long to spread more widely? Isolated cases suggestive of AIDS before 1981 have been identified in Europe and North America with the aid of retrospective analysis of stored samples, but it has been difficult to detect cases in Central Africa before the 1980s. The first probable cases of AIDS were documented in Zaire, now DRC, and Rwanda in 1977. So, also, no HIV has been found in tissue samples stored before 1959 in Central Africa. Looking at HIV diversity in the earliest samples, one study has estimated that fewer than 100 people were living with HIV before the mid-1950s. So Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm back. I guess I got to be careful about what I say, or is that the fundamental attribution error? I should get your comment off the screen. My bad. I didn't realize that I'd left that there. Okay, cool. I don't know exactly how long I was out or something. So hopefully that was just a brief blip, but I was kind of getting a little bit off track anyway. It's an hour and 45 in, so I'm just going to try and see what I want to make sure I squeeze in here. A little bit of a jam-packed, plenty of resources to share. So I hope I'm not kind of throwing too much at you guys at once. I just think it's good to make an episode like this, and then if there's any information that people have trouble digesting, you could rewatch it, kind of thing, right? So this was an article by Whitney Webb from the Unlimited Hangout. So she and Jeremy Lafredo, so from the Gray Zone. So if you guys, I'm sure you guys all in the chat know about these people very well and how they do great work, but anyone else is watching later, if you've never heard of these people, you should be following their work, because they really have been doing some very important journalism. So this developers of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine tied to UK eugenics movement. The developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have previously undisclosed ties to the renamed British Eugenics Society, as well as other eugenics-linked institutions like the Wellcome Trust. So when you do enough of this research, you see all these names start to resurface, right? On April 30th, AstraZeneca and the university, this article was written in December 26, 2020. On April 30th, AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford announced a landmark agreement for the development of COVID-19 vaccine. The agreement involved AstraZeneca overseeing aspects of the development, as well as manufacturing and distribution, while the Oxford side, via the Jenner Institute and Oxford Vaccine Group, researched and developed the vaccine. Less than a month after this agreement was reached, the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership was awarded a contract from the U.S. government as part of Operation Warp Speed, the public-private COVID vaccination effort dominated by the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence. Though the partnership was announced in April, Oxford's Jenner Institute had already begun developing the COVID-19 vaccine months before, in mid-January. According to a recent BBC report, almost as if they knew they were going to get approved, right? Like it was a slam dunk, like public-private partnerships aren't fascist at all, right? According to a recent BBC report, it was in January that the Jenner Institute first became aware of how serious the pandemic would soon become when Andrew Pollard, who works for the Jenner Institute and heads the Oxford Vaccine Group, shared a taxi with a modeler who worked for the UK's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. During the taxi ride, the scientist told him data suggested there was going to be a pandemic, not unlike the 1918 flu. Because of this sole encounter, we are told, the Jenner Institute began to pour millions into the early development of vaccine, well before the scope of the crisis was clear. Yeah, bullshit. I don't believe you, okay? I'm pretty sure they had insider information. And when you have insider information like the 9/11 thing of a crisis that's going to happen, you may be causing a crisis so you can be the hero coming to the rescue. So I didn't really highlight everything from this article because I was kind of thinking exactly what is happening. If I keep talking too much, I will start to get hoarse. So I encourage you guys to read this yourself, because Whitney Webb does, like you see, she does solid. She will nail every last nail into their coffin, right? But I wanted to point out this from April 16, 2020, just to kind of demonstrate how this pandemic, whether it was orchestrated or natural, it's definitely an opportunity for advancing the eugenic principles, right? So I missed this, even though it was 5 years ago. I didn't realize they were using CRISPR as a COVID-19 diagnostic. So Mammoth Biosciences announced a publication of a study demonstrating that they could detect COVID from a respiratory swab in under 45 minutes using CRISPR. And CRISPR opens the door to new type of medicine, genome surgery, right? But then if you're looking at, like, if you look up, is genome surgery I don't know if I closed those tabs or whatever, but if you look at just like is maybe I'll search for it here, whatever is genome surgery eugenics, there should be a bunch of articles. The dark side of CRISPR, the Human Genome Project and eugenic concerns, the power of heredity and the relevance of, so it's not really a good, not exactly the perfect live kind of fishing for whatever info, but the point is that it definitely is genome surgery, whatever. You can edit the human cell line and stuff with that technology. If they're going to pretend like it's not eugenics, they're lying, right? So I wanted to maybe, I mentioned Jonas Salk, so that's another story. The myth of Jonas Salk, right? It was Albert Sabin's vaccine, not Salk, that truly defeated polio. July 1st, 2005. April 12th was a day 50 years ago. The U.S. Public Health Service licensed a killed virus vaccine against poliomyelitis developed by Jonas Salk. In the decades since, a great myth has grown to dominate the popular imagination. It's sad that there's so many stories that you look into, like HIV, like AZT, whatever, and the polio stuff. There's too many incidences of these heroes, whatever, being myths being made up in the popular imagination, that there's a backstory behind it that reveals a whole bunch of shady business. It shouldn't be that way. Okay, it should be once or two times if you have a healthy scientific environment. Like otherwise, like it seems clear that scientific fraud is like easily gotten away with. So, in the decades since, a great myth has grown to dominate the popular imagination. Its name is The Conquest of Polio, and Salk is its hero. On the anniversary day and minute, the Smithsonian Institution tolled the bell on its oldest building 50 times to open an exhibit at the National Museum of American History centered on Salk and the vaccine. That morning, the science correspondent for NPR extolled the polio conquest and the Salk vaccine in the first part of a three-part series. Publications marked the occasion. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Smithsonian Magazine. In the weeks before, 2 new books had appeared. 6 more are now in the works. This retelling of the history of polio, however, is largely a distortion. The full true story is far more complex. Its hero is Albert Sabin. For if any one man conquered polio, it was Sabin, who developed the oral attenuated live virus vaccine. Albert Sabin, by the way, and Jonas Salk, both of them Jewish. So while Salk's vaccine did slow down the incidence of polio among middle-class Americans, its cost and its requirement of 3 injections and a booster meant that for years the disease continued to affect the poor and others lacking access to proper medical care. It was only after Sabin's oral vaccine, which was cheap, effective, and easy to administer, was licensed for production in 1962, that polio could be fully controlled in the United States. But it seems some prefer the myth to the fact. So why is it that the story is recurring? Well, it's capitalism, right? It's capitalism's distortion on science, okay? Because the cost and requirement of 3 injections and a booster meant that you could make more money for years off the disease if you let it continue to affect the poor and others lacking access to expensive, cost-prohibitive medical care, okay? It's only after you adopt a more socialistic, effective attitude towards the problem that you actually solve the problem, okay? So, just briefly, because I'm going to kind of probably get criticized for pseudoscientific whatever attacks on people. I just want to kind of point out to my little haters on Twitter and shit, whatever, who like think that I'm like an idiot for my points of views, whatever. Maybe I'm eugenic in my own way. There seems to be a eugenic legacy behind a lot of the things that are considered progressive in science, right? It's sad how often, okay, you've got someone who was extremely important in the advancement of the field, whatever, has to be some kind of Nazi, whatever. We can't make scientific discoveries without letting Nazis make the discoveries. Okay, so this is Alex Carrel. He was a French surgeon and biologist who spent most of his scientific career in the United States. He was awarded the Nobel Prize, okay, for pioneering vascular suturing techniques. So basically, we wouldn't really be able to do organ transplantation maybe if people like this guy hadn't discovered these techniques. Like that, at this point, we've developed better techniques, but we needed these earlier advancements to build off of, right? But this guy invented the first perfusion pump with Charles Lindbergh, of all people, who, if you guys, anyone knows about him, sorry, my mouse is dying here. Charles Lindbergh is a crazy story, whatever, flew all across the Atlantic, or whatever, fanatical Nazi, whatever. I think he was cahooting with the British Royals, whatever. Read up on him if you don't know about him. But I didn't realize that he had anything to do with advancing organ transplantation. But I guess Charles Lindbergh had something to do with that. So, but Carrel was a eugenicist, and he was he is known for his leading role in implementing eugenic policies in Vichy, France, right? But then still kind of respected. These people should have been like shamed into their graves, and they were honored like those fucking Confederate people were given statues and shit. I also just wanted to quickly mention about him, Jesuits, right? Educated by Jesuits, right? So, and just to sort of demonstrate, in the problem with organ transplants, like the industry, there's some really serious problems there that if you want to be a liberal about it, you want to just have faith that your system works for you. You won't imagine that what they tell you isn't really what's going on behind closed doors, whatever. That maybe you should be concerned about who's actually going to get that organ if you take it out of my body. Is it really going to go to who you say it is, right? So this is the repetitive history of CMS failing patients and donors with flawed performance metrics for organ procurement organizations. So this, I didn't really highlight it, but I'll try and just quickly explain to you. There are then these bodies, what do they call them? OPOs, organ procurement organizations, okay? They've been criticizing this government center for Medicaid services for not really following the science, so like disregarding what they're saying about improving the statistics to be able to rate which organizations are quality organizations. And then, so it starts like from in 1998, the first metric adopted, and then they adopted a first metric that was like a grossly overly simplistic approach to doing statistics, right? And so then they get pressure that they need to change this measurement, and they just disregard it all the way up until like now, right? This says this is an absolute prologue to the legal setbacks HSCMS will face in 2026. So they do improve the measure, but they like slow walk it. They don't really care to do it quickly and effectively, right? So to me, these are the kinds of problems that they need to have in an organ transplant system if you want to be doing things like organ trafficking, right? So that's just to kind of briefly to mention that there are serious flaws in that system, even though like maybe only 5% is illegally don't like trafficked or whatever, but that's 5% is a high number, right? So I'll share with this. Sorry if I'm kind of being a little amateur with this presentation. If I was more of an actual journalist, I might be able to really kind of nail this point home, right? But illegal organ trade is more sophisticated than one might think. Who's behind it and how it could be controlled. So very grisly topic. Sorry to have to maybe put you through the field. Like viewer discretion advised. Feel free to tune out if you want. I should have highlighted things in this. I forgot to do that. But In March 2023, a Nigerian politician, his wife, and a medical middleman were found guilty of an organ trafficking plot after they brought a man to the UK from Lagos to sell his kidney. Several months later in Kenya, following the arrest of a televangelist on charges of a mass killing of his followers, autopsies on the corpses revealed missing organs, raising suspicions of forced organ harvesting. In 2020, researcher Sean Kalum exposed how numerous African migrants sold their kidneys in Cairo and Egypt in hopes of using the earnings to pay smugglers to take them across the Mediterranean into Europe. So that's happening. These reports and cases are part of a global proliferation of the organ trade that started in the late 1980s. So that's probably worth noting. It coincided with the advancements in transplantation. So the eugenicists improved the techniques, and then we're not really politically in a position to actually ensure that these advancements aren't disastrous because they create a black market like instantly. So until the 1980s, transplantation was regarded as a risky and experimental procedure. Since the introduction of immunosuppressive drugs in the 1980s, which helped to prevent the body from rejecting organs, which helped with the pharmaceutical industry came up with a way to make human beings capable of doing the unnatural. So it has become standardized practice. Organ transplants are now conducted in hospitals in more than 90 countries. Transplantation has, however, become a victim of its own success. Not that I'm saying it's not wonderful miracle that people can be saved like that. The problem is that now, because the capitalist instinct or whatever, the profit motive, they have learned how to be able to take your organs from you, like in a war zone like Ukraine or something, and they can do it quite effectively or whatever, and that now makes it more of a reason to murder people for their organs, right? So one step forward, two steps back. So transplantation victim of its own success, with demand for organs far outpacing supply. Despite strategies to enlarge the donor organ pool, the worldwide organ shortage grows every year. He found that the claims made about the organ trade, sorry to skip, this is just the organ trafficker guy, a researcher guy, finds claims are made about the organ trade in the absence of factual data. These have strengthened popular notions of the issue as an underground crime organized by mafia-like criminals and rogue doctors who perform transplants clandestinely. The reality is starkly different. The nature of the organ trade is far removed from these mythical depictions. In all criminal cases reported to date, illegal transplants took place in medical hospitals and clinics with the involvement of medical staff. Organ trafficking networks are highly organized with close collaborations between the legal upper world, medical doctors, notaries, and lawyers, and the criminal underworld, recruiters and brokers. While it's likely that there are also unreported hidden cases that do not take place inside medical institutions, the available knowledge indicates that the medical sector is helping to organize and facilitate the trade in human organs. So that's kind of what I wanted to read from that, right? It's a very complex situation, but I wanted people to maybe realize, especially with the American healthcare system, I feel really sorry for you guys, whatever. I'm not like Canada is a whole lot better, whatever, but I wonder how much like organ trafficking is taking place in those godforsaken hospitals, right? So with the private, whatever, privatized care. So moving on from this grisly topic, I didn't mean to get hung up on that. I just want people to be aware your heroes might be villains, right? Because even with something like test tube babies, right? Why is it always a eugenic guy who's the father of this whatever invention? Okay. It's just sickening how much influence they have still had, and yet history records them as the villain. Everyone knows that eugenics is not okay, that the Nazis were wrong for doing what they did, but then somehow all of the people just turn a blind eye or whatever. They're like, well, if it saves my uncle, I don't care if eugenics is bad, like. So then there's probably kind of over sold my point here. Probably boring you guys, right? Here's the article I was trying to say about gene therapy, the gene surgery. So the backdoor eugenics are IVF and gene therapy an asset for humanity or an ethical threat? The issue is that these technologies you can't really criticize them without like the liberals attacking you for being some kind of anti-science conservative freak. But we are in an extremely dangerous period of history where they're opening wide the back door of eugenics, right? Like they were condemned for it, for doing it the Nazi atrocity way. So they'll just creep in with like a mission creep and convince us that it's okay to alter the genome and to the point where it's too late, right? Where generations will be born, like manipulating the plants or whatever, genetically modified crops. Once you modify that organism and then breed it selectively, you can't get the original genome back ever again. That's what they want to do. They want to kind of just rape the genome. So, yeah, not sure. I don't want to bore you guys too much, but I'll just kind of scroll briefly. Yeah, okay. So some in the law and science communities are deeply concerned that eugenics is being resurrected. They fear modern technologies, including gene and stem cell therapy, in vitro fertilization, and even prenatal screenings for genetic abnormalities, promote a type of new eugenics or newgenics. As a practitioner of these fields, Professor Orozco is acutely aware of the ethical and moral questions. They try and assure you that they're very acutely aware of the problem and they're taking it very seriously, right? But then what do they do? What does he do? He'll make a claim that it's okay at the end of the day, right? Here's what strikes me is that these deaf activists, okay, there are even disabled people who start to think eugenically, right? So even deaf people will argue to to select embryos to ensure that their child is born deaf because they see it as like an advantage, right? So that's kind of like a eugenics can creep into the mind in ways you don't expect. So, but all right, this is what I was saying. This guy, as bad as it is that these technologies could be a modern form of eugenics, this professor guy says it's misleading and deeply offensive to suggest that the IVF is a modern form of eugenics. Why? Because he defines the embryo as not a person. So you sidestep the issue of eugenics entirely because you legally don't define them as a person. Well, I'm sorry that that's not acceptable. The ethical problem still exists, okay? The accusation should not gall you, okay? Because it is potentially still a modern form of eugenics, because it will become a human after you alter it. So, and then it will forever affect the genome going forward. The more embryos that you alter before, like when it's just a small cohort of people, it's not going to affect the genome. When it's millions of people, there's already millions of people born from IVF, right? So you definitely are, like with CRISPR and stuff, you're just making it impossible for us to avoid eugenics in the future. You're forcing the issue. Okay. So, and then we can get into I should probably wrap it up now, but we could talk, I'll have to talk about it another day about the nuance about eugenics and abortion and eugenics um, birth control pills, right? The people who brought us, just like IVF and the organ transplant, right? The person who brings you birth control, Margaret Sanger, well-known eugenicist, right, historically. So the evidence is there. It's up to us to see it, okay? This is also here. I can't really share video because of bad shit, whatever, but just real quickly, I just noticed a tab. There's this, I think it was R.A. Fisher, the guy behind the anti-science in the tobacco industry, convincing us that cigarette smoke doesn't kill you. That guy was a eugenicist, right? These people are fucking everywhere. They're behind everything, all right? So I don't know what else to leave off on. Maybe about how oh well, I should mention about the longevity research, okay? Because there's the issue about the pursuit of mortality, right? The capitalists want to live forever in a sense, right? So I think I'm going to just speculate a little bit. Why would there be such an intensive focus from these capitalist billionaires. Why would they want to encourage research in like the COVID research so much, right? Because I think that the idea of a medicine using a viral vector is something that would be that is of interest to the people pursuing immortality, right? So, and you see who is it that's involved in that. That's Israel's longevity revolution. The startup nation is rapidly emerging as a global leader in geroscience and healthy longevity. Okay, so the eugenicists, the Zionists, the fascists, they are interested in immortality research, right? So not just COVID research, right? But also I would say, not to be transphobic, right? But I think that there would be, from a cold-blooded political perspective, from a eugenic perspective, there is interest in hormone research uh, for the purposes of longevity research. So it's a nice little plausible deniability, right? Where it's they won't know that I really want to this information for the purpose of the longevity research if I just tell them that it's about making it possible for trans people to have a safe surgery, right? And then now that I mentioned this, I just wanted to quickly point out another Nazi eugenicist who awarded a Nobel Prize for his work on sex hormones, right? So it's entirely possible not to be conspiratorial too much, but and also Magnus Hirschfeld is a very big name as far as was a German physician, sexologist, and LGBTQ advocate whose citizenship was later revoked by the Nazi government. He's really important for advocacy for homosexual and transgender rights, right? He's targeted by fascists for being Jewish and gay and stuff. But he was also what I was kind of had highlighted here. He was also a Zionist, as it happens to be, right? So there's a lot of complexity here. It's not so simple as to paint like black versus white. Okay, he mentioned, and wherever I'd found it, I shouldn't have screwed up that wherever I had it. He says the reason why he didn't want to stay in Palestine when he visited was because they adopted Hebrew instead of German. But then he wouldn't want to go back to Germany because he's being prosecuted by whatever. I'm just saying it's crazy how there's all these links, right? And there's also this Carl Baer, German-Israeli author, social worker, reformer, suffragist, and Zionist. This is the first transgender person to undergo sexual reassignment surgery was a Zionist, right? It's just like irony. Okay, I'm not really sure why I wanted to point that out, right? But I'm just saying, like there's this eugenic maybe tendency that people share, even if they're mortal enemies. It kind of explains why they're like here. It explains the significance in history in a sense, right? So as far as people trying to say like the LGBTQ people are like some kind of Nazi cult now, I think that they're often not knowing the history that trans people were persecuted for trying to be who they are, kind of thing in that time, right? Like it's a little bit ridiculous to kind of call trans activists like fascists in a sense when they were one of the ones being murdered by the Nazis in a sense. But then at the same time, when you want to talk about like forcing medical advancement, those early like sex change surgeries were not like legally sanctioned. They kind of just had some like what you're not allowed to do with a medical procedure, right? You're not allowed to just say like, hey, I'm not legally allowed to do this, but because they're persecuting us, let's go step into my office here and I'll do this without being allowed to. And that's what they kind of had to do with abortion too. And the problem is like the law people are so bad at being justice that they kind of make people have to do it this way, right? But abortion, they had to, just like prohibition, like they had to to do it illegally to the point to make the law unenforceable, right? And that's kind of, but with something like, with some kind of research or whatever, it just opens the door for eugenics or whatever, because like there's a black market for that activity in a sense, right? So that's why it's kind of has to be regulated, but it's impossible to talk about, like it's such a controversy, right? Right now I feel like I'm not really doing this topic justice, right? But you get paranoid about this stuff, right? So to try and end off on a better note, I want to show people that like the the scientific community is moving beyond this germ theory paradigm that people call me like an idiot for online or whatever, for supporting, or for having some kind of critical appraisal of the germ theory that justifies their vaccine and their lockdown stances and stuff like that. When science is kind of validating some of like what Béchamp is saying, I'm starting to pay attention, right? Because there is this war on germs that they've been doing that is demonstrating to be the wrong approach, okay? There's a growing understanding of the importance of a healthy microbiome and challenging traditional thinking that resulted in the general acceptance of the germ theory of disease. We propose a more encompassing microbial theory of health that will have implications for the way that we address our relationships with microbes, including hygiene policy and community-based infection control practices, okay? So they've considered theories on impact of human exposure to non-pathogenic microbes, and a new theory is being proposed because the research is demonstrating that moving from germ theory is important, right? We can't stay with bad science that was kind of influenced by eugenics, because you need to move past the contradictions, right? You need to understand what they are. In order to be scientific, you need to move past them. So not to go backwards, not to say germ theory is wrong, so let's go back to miasma theory, because that's the important thing that germ theory did, was moving beyond the miasma theory and the humoral theory, right? The more superstitious kind of theories. But now I see miasma theory kind of coming back with this COVID-19 stuff, right? Oh, this airborne virus going to kill you, right? That would be true if what these guys are saying wasn't also true in a sense, right? It's like the airborne microbes, pathogens and stuff, it is a factor, it is, right? But then they're neglecting the influence of the terrain of the body, right? It's more and more, it's being proven that, like with this article here, the gut microbiome is more important, the terrain of the body is more important in influencing who gets sick and why than they previously understood, because germ theory was saying it's primarily the pathogen that makes people sick, right? So anyway, I'll kind of leave it there because I've been going on and on. So I hope you guys enjoyed my my large spiel there. And I hope that you guys are considering to give the germ terrain duality theory kind of the microbial theory of health, right? The social determinants of health or whatever also being a factor, right? I hope you understand that all of these things lend weight to the like so-called anti-vaxxers in that dispute over what happened in the pandemic. We will be able to get to our answers as to why the vaccine didn't work or why the virus didn't kill people you thought it would, if you can get to this deeper issue of Antoine Béchamp versus Louis Pasteur. So I hope that I have effectively gotten that across to people. I hope that anyway, so sorry, Michael, it's getting late. Yeah, I have to watch rest. Have a good night, everyone. Yeah, I'm just kind of rambling at this point because without Abby around, I'm not sure how to wrap up so much. So I guess I'll just kind of, I don't have any music, or I don't have any videos to play off for the end. So I'm just gonna have to wrap it on the music. I'm not sure what to talk about next week. Hopefully I'll get a guest. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next week. Hope I didn't bore you. So have a good night, everyone.